Hello, Ilona. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm so good. Thank you so much for having me on your show. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, very good. And I'm excited to have you too. And okay, we're trying this with video, so let's see how it goes. And yeah, excited to speak to you because I've been listening to your podcast, Money Memories, and we've been chatting a bit before as well. But I'm excited to hear actually your money memory story, actually. So that's why I brought you on. But maybe before we dive into the topic, can you introduce yourself briefly, Ilona?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So my name is Ilona. I have spent my entire career working in financial services. I still work in finance.
Mhm,
I grew up as an immigrant. My family and I are immigrants. My father is from Cuba and my mother is from Russia. We moved to the United States when I was 5 years old.
mhm.
Um, I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, which is a really nice town. And I studied at the University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton School, for my undergraduate degree and received my MBA from Northwestern. And as I mentioned, currently work in financial services. And in the last year, I decided to start a financial literacy website called bearandthebull.com, where I write about where I try to demystify different topics in personal finance and explain it in layman's terms. And to the best of my abilities, I try to post them in Spanish and English. So you can say that financial services, financial literacy, all things finance are kind of within my wheelhouse. In addition to that, I'm a contributing fintech writer for Forbes, where I write about different trends in venture capital and fintech. And as you introduced me, I also am a podcast host. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit about me. From that, you would probably think I live, eat, breathe, and sleep finance, but ironically, I don't think I do.
Okay, okay. So we'll dive into that. So Ilona, first, then let's go into your money memory. So, of course, you apparently live in a universe of numbers, finance, and compound interest. But okay, where does that all come from? So maybe let's start with your first money memory that comes to mind, something that happened in your childhood or anything that comes to mind.
Yeah, I think I always ask the guests on my show, what is your earliest or most impactful money memory? And for me, that memory is going to the bank with my father when I was a little girl. I was probably in elementary school, I think. And, I was an only child. We didn't have babysitters. I had to go with my dad everywhere during holidays, and we never went anywhere fun. We would go to like the IRS office. It sucked. And on this particular day, I think he picked me up from school and we had to go to the bank. And I remember waiting for my dad. And when he came out of the bank, he was walking really, and my dad's a very fast walker, but on this day, he was walking particularly quickly. And I remember being like, wait up for me, dad. Like, what's going on? And he was in such a fuss and he recounted to me how the teller at this bank had apparently slightly miscalculated a balance. Although what was on the receipt was correct
Mhm.
when she was reading it out. Let's just say for illustrative purposes, it was 3 and 3, and instead of 6, she said it was 5. And when my father corrected her, she responded, "Oh, it's close enough." To which he replied, "There's no such thing as close enough in math. There's either the number or there isn't." And I just remember thinking, like, huh? I just remember thinking, like, is that what my dad is really upset about, like math? But I think it's a really impactful memory for me because I think for me, at its core, money is it's just math.
Mhm.
There's no emotion to it. It's just math. It's just a math problem. It's just a number. It's just balances adding up, multiplied over time. And so whether maybe that moment is when I kind of started to think that way, but
Mhm.
I've definitely observed from my show people have a lot of emotional reactions and responses to money, and I think somehow in my life I've kind of I don't know, maybe I'm just a weirdo, but I think I have a much more cold reception to money. I'm just like, it's a number and it needs to either grow or be spent. And so
Mhm.
I'd say that's my earliest and most impactful money memory because it really taught me that this is just like a simple algebra problem, not much more.
Okay, that's interesting what you're saying because, of course, when I think about investing, I think about coldness, about trying to remove emotions. So, and the problem, what I see or what I hear, and I guess you're familiar with it as well, is the emotions actually. So, yeah, it's interesting to hear that. Okay, you had this cold approach first. So, how did that translate then further into your childhood, teenage years, maybe your approach to money? How did that evolve, or did you always have that a numbers cold approach?
I think so. I think it definitely translated into me pursuing a career in finance and
Mm-hmm.
studying economics. I like data. I like working with numbers. I like looking at numbers to tell the story. But in terms of my personal finance habits, I've been. It's interesting. I kind of always go back to how much of our money habits are kind of innate and in our personalities, and how much are shaped
Mm-hmm.
by our environment. And another money memory I have is as a little girl, I would go shopping at the mall with one of my best friends. We were like 8 years old. And myself and her, we would always get like $5 from our parents, right? They're like, go
Mm-hmm.
to the mall, spend $5 on whatever you want.
Yeah.
And I would always spend like 10 cents on the cheapest thing I could find. And my mom would always say, like, you would spend 10 cents on like a candy bar, and then
Mm-hmm.
you'd split it with me. Like I would share it with her. She's like, your friend would borrow your $4.90.
Yeah, I would
She would
spend those
always take
$5.
yeah, spend it. And she's like, and then she'd borrow it from you. So I can't tell you where, but anyways, I think what I'm trying to say is I've always been very frugal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really enjoy shopping. I buy what I need.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's just in my personality. I can't explain that, but I definitely think that kind of approach to numbers when I started taking my own personal finances seriously. And when I really sat down and told myself, okay, I need to make a plan. I need to understand where my retirement balances are. I need to stop being like a bird with my head in the sands. I need to come out. I
Mm-hmm.
had to find that, like, as I think I was ironically kind of like pushing that aside because I was like, I'm doing whatever. I'm saving a lot of money. I don't have credit card debt. I don't need to look at this, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I had to finally just take the courage and find the nerve to say, okay, you need to just open up all your balances, figure out what you want to do, and educate yourself on the things that you're missing out on. So yeah, I definitely fall victim to, or I fall prey to wanting to kind of shirk those responsibilities sometimes. But when
Yeah.
I go back to at the core, this is just a numbers game. I think that helps me.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that I mean, you mentioned that you moved to the US when you were 5. Okay, maybe you don't have a lot of memories from before 5, but since your family is not from the US originally, do you think that plays a role as well in your approach to money?
I definitely think so. I think for my parents, the capital system is not their home system.
Mm-hmm.
They were raised and they were raised and uh, lived in a communist system, which is very different. And I'm
Yeah.
starting to really understand the impacts of that as I get older. But for them, they had to learn about financial education from scratch when they came to the United States. You know, things like credit scores don't exist in Cuba or Russia,
Mm-hmm.
and building credit, and you know why that's important. So I think definitely observing my parents probably really influenced me. They've always been very frugal. I would always see how just very budget conscious, always buying things on sale. I remember my mom always cutting coupons, and like I would look at coupons too with her when the coupons came in the mail. I have very vivid memories of my parents always negotiating, and even like we would go to like a family trip to Cancun, and I would want like a keychain, and let's say it costs like 50 pesos. My mom would be like, offer 20. And I was like, but she's like, offer 20 or just walk away. And I would be like, but I really want this keychain. And she was like, it's not worth more than 5. So, and I was remember being like, why are you so savage? I just want this little keychain. But I definitely, yeah, those negotiating, being very tenacious, and really being very
it's
mindful of your spending.
it's like
Those are things
fighting
that
for
I
your
observe.
money almost.
Yes, exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. So I got to really see, like, I remember like when if I didn't check my bank account, my dad would be like, he would be like, who's gonna care about your money more than you? Like, why do you not care about
Mhm.
like these things? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
it takes so much work to earn a dollar, right? So I feel like I was always that message was really relayed upon me when I was growing up. Was like, this is very you need to care about this. You need to understand this. You need
Mhm.
to watch out for this because this is only you can. No one can care more than you.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's true, but it's interesting. I like to hear it because for example, my parents. Okay, let's say they have a different approach to money. I mean, not fundamentally. I mean, they're kind of aligned, but when it comes to negotiating, for example, my mom is more comfortable with it than my dad. My dad is a bit afraid to negotiate. So we are pushing him a bit. I know he doesn't listen, so it's okay. I can talk about him because it's in English. But anyway, so no, so it's interesting. And then once you moving back to when you were a young adult, so you said, look, I put my head out of the sand and started to really look at my finances, credit cards, etc., taking responsibility. So sure, you have this cold approach, you have your background, but how did you do that concretely?
Yeah, so I have always been a very good saver.
Hmm.
I've always been very frugal. So I lived in some very high cost of living cities, such as Manhattan and San
Okay.
Francisco.
Mm.
And just to give you an example, in both of those, like in Manhattan, all my friends had apartments with elevators and washer dryers in the building or like a dishwasher, and I was like, I don't need a dishwasher, I don't even really need an elevator, I just need a bed and I just need something that isn't viewing like the dumpster, and it needs to not be that expensive.
So
So
you
I
didn't host a
always
lot of parties, maybe.
I mean, in a studio apartment, you could probably host like your cat in Manhattan. Yeah, well, I mean, I would have like a friend over for dinner, but definitely not a
Yeah.
party spot where I was living. But I was always very mindful of like, I know this is the market, but I don't want to spend that much money. So let me see
Mm,
what can I cut out? What can I sacrifice? Because it
sure.
doesn't make sense to me to spend this much money on an apartment. Like for me, like, so I had like a good sense of like, this is my budget, this is how much I'm willing to spend. And because my friends have marble or whatever, granite countertops and like rainfall showers, it's okay. I'll survive because I need to save money. So I've always been a very good saver.
Mhm.
Like I would save money from my paycheck. Like I said, I'm not a big shopper. So I've always been able to pay off my credit card. I've never had credit card debt and things like that. But for me, what it meant to take the next step in my finances is really mapping out like an investment plan. So I had all this money stashed in my savings. And I remember I called a good friend of mine he's like he was the most financially literate person that I know.
Mhm.
And so we looked at my balances and he was like, okay, this is how much have you in cash, basically. And he was like, Ilona, what is the interest? What's inflation? And I was like 2 to 3%. And he was like, okay. So he's like, what's the APR on your high yield savings account?
Mhm.
And I was like, 0.7%. He's like, so you're throwing away 2.5% every year. And I was like,
And
I
you're the
was like
finance
very
girl.
shocked. Exactly. And I was like, this is he was like, okay, your quote unquote high yield savings. He's like, we shouldn't even call it that anymore. It's just like, he's like, you need to invest, right? And so I was like, right, that's ridiculous. I know all these things. But so, anyways, that was the first kind of step that I took, was finally
Yeah.
parking my money out of cash. Or like I have enough in my emergency fund, thankfully. But taking that money and putting it to work, and allocating it across various mutual funds and ETFs. I'd also, for us in the United States, we have Roth IRAs, 401ks, different ways to contribute to retirement. So fortunately, I'd always been pretty good about the 401k contributions. But for example, in hindsight, I realized I should have been contributing to both my Roth when I was eligible to, as well as my 401k. So these are things that I'm like, these are the lessons that I should have had
Yeah.
or
And
that I
so
should
for
have
the
known. But
international listeners, the Roth is a retirement account that you can benefit from, but it's in addition to your employers, right? So it's like you do it
yes.
on your on a voluntary basis.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Great explanation. And so I had always studied it was funny. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a founder of this fintech platform, and he's like, at Wharton, they teach us, LBOs and M&A, but no one actually sits down and teaches you like how to manage a checkbook. And I was
Mhm.
like, yeah. So we felt kind of really financially illiterate starting in the working world. Like we were very good about managing our money, like in terms of saving, but in terms of actually investing for ourselves, that was kind of ironically, that was lost on us, these great Wharton graduates.
Yes, I know. I know the same problem, and I talked to a friend of mine who lives here in Luxembourg, and we talked about the same. We come from the same university. We studied finance together, and she even worked with wealth management. But then she started really to invest only a couple of years ago. Huh? Then it's really funny. I mean, in the stock market, so it's really funny how it comes. Huh? We study LBOs, MBOs, whatever, econometrics, and then yeah, it's only when you're in the real life that you actually really look at your finances. So that's the same in US and Europe, I can say, or in Belgium, I would say, to be specific. So that's interesting. And then so you start your career, you start to making these moves, 401ks, Roth IRAs. And then what? Did you then start your podcast and blog at that time, or was there a transition phase going into in between? I would say.
Ironically, I think my blog was the fire that I needed to get myself together because
Hmm.
I was like, you can't be writing about these things and not living your truth. This is ridiculous. Like, how can you tell people to contribute to the effort and not do it yourself? So, so like, I can say that I practice what I preach.
Hmm.
But ironically, like, I think not like I was always contributing for my 401k and things like that, but the investment side of things, I was like, how am I sitting here telling people to invest when I'm rotting away my own money in a high yield saving? That's ridiculous. So in a way, like I think the two things came together, like where I took the move to, kind of educate people and I started educating
Yeah,
myself. And then I put that into practice. So because I was like, I can't be a fraud. I can't be telling people things I'm not doing. That's ridiculous.
exactly. It's correct. And then going back to your first memory, so you said, okay, I was looking at numbers cold, and I mean, from a cold perspective, without emotion. So are you still having this approach when you talk about, I mean, sorry, when you invest in money, when you invest your money yourself, do you manage
Yeah,
to split with the emotions?
I think so. I remember when I got the one time that for example, we got like a bonus last year for work, and I
Hmm.
texted my friend. I was like, "Oh, we got this bonus. What should I do with it? Like, how much should I put into investing, and how much should I put into like my savings account? Because anyway." And he's like, "You should put." He's like, "Well, between 90 and 100%." For a second, I was like, for a split second, and then I just put it all into my investment account. So like I did feel like the bye, but then I was like, no, I'm gonna put it in. It's gonna compound interest, and it's gonna be great. And if it's a privilege that I'm able to do that and not have to
Hmm.
take something like that and pay off
Yeah,
like
debt
a
or
high
whatever. Yeah.
interest debt or something. So yeah.
And living in the US, how did you manage to stay out of debt? Because it's a common problem in the US, that the credit card debt part, where people buy stuff they don't need, but it it's not always easy to tackle. I mean, because it depends a bit how you grow, and if everybody in your I guess your environment, your friends, your parents are used to credit card debt, it's easy to fall into that trap, and then hard to get out, but it's possible. But what about you? You never got into that trap?
Nope. My parents also never had credit card debt. So I think, like I said, they modeled pretty good, responsible financial habits for me. Also, when my parents first gave me a credit card, the way some people fear Jesus is how I feared the credit card. I remember they were like, "This is a credit card, okay?" They're like, "You will never use it unless unless your life is on fire."
Yeah.
And when you do use it, you need to pay it back right. You need to pay it back right away. And I was like, okay, oh my god. So I was like so scared of my credit card. I was like, it could have been on fire. That's how scared I was of it.
Yeah.
But I think that's a valuable lesson that they gave me, right? They were like this, like my parents are always like, credit cards are not games, they're not toys. You only
Mm.
spend what you can afford to pay off every month, and you need to pay it off every single month. Like I knew nothing else about life, but I knew to pay off my credit card every single month because I knew bad things happen when you don't. So
Yeah.
I'm happy that my parent, like, they really instilled the fear of God with me in terms of credit card debt. And I was fortunate in that when I went to college, my parents are wonderful, and they were able to pay for my education. So I did not have to take
Mhm.
out student loans as an undergraduate. However, I did take out student loans as a graduate student. And that was my first time doing that. And I remember I was like looking at these numbers and I was like, oh my God, I'm scared. Well, am I going to be broke for the rest of my life? But thankfully, was able to navigate that landscape, and like now my student loans are everything is copacetic. But that
Remove
was
the
really the
emotions, Ilona, and then it should go fine. It's a numbers game.
but it's I mean, it's intimidating when you see that, because you're like,
Yeah.
I knew I was going there. I was like, absolutely, I'm going to business school. This is one of the best schools in the world. Duh, I'm gonna go. It's a
Mm.
privilege to be able to attend. But then I was like, so I need to be making what kind of salary to graduate after I graduate? Like, are you sure you're gonna get me a job after I graduate, right? Like, we're gonna be employed. So it's less about like but it's more about like the after, because you know that like the finding the job is all on you. So like now, like you have one part of it, you were in school. The second part of it is what you do with that education, because
Sure.
now you have this like burden on you that you signed it away. So it's on you, it's yours now.
Mhm. And so now, what are your future plans? Because now you have, it seems, all your ducks in a row. What is the future for yourself? I mean, in terms of investments and your finances.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not currently a homeowner. I would like to be one day,
Hmm.
but it's not something that's particularly stressing me out at this point. The idea of parting with like 100,000, I'm not like super thrilled to be like, let me go put it all on a down payment. Like that, I'm not in a rush to do that.
Hmm.
So that's probably the next step for me in terms of, my life. Also just like continuing to rebalance my portfolio and things like that. So yeah, as an investor, as a somewhat like in personal finance person, that's probably the next goal that I would have. But it's also not like a
It's not a
pressing, like
must. Okay.
exactly,
Or
exactly.
it's not urgent. Okay. Okay.
Yes.
And then I was wondering as well, Ilona, because you hear all these money stories on your podcast. It's quite interesting. Then you hear a lot of perspective, even from I listened to the one with Warren from London, so it's from all around the world. And do you have some common patterns or common general issues that you see that are recurring or recurring? That comes back.
Yeah, the one thing that I will say that most people, just about everyone says is, before they tell me their story is, oh, probably no one can relate to this, or I'm probably the only person that really feel it. I'm always like,
Mhm.
no, and I'm like, this is why I have the show, because the number of times I hear people say, well, I'm probably the only one. I'm like, you're not the only one. Like you're like
Mhm.
someone might have anxiety around, like for example, I've had people who said, I actually grew up, in a really financially stable household. So I feel weird talking about my money memories. And I was like,
Mhm.
that's a thing. People feel that way too. They feel like financial literacy is not for them, or not financial literacy, or they feel like certain finance topics aren't for them because they might be
Mhm.
more focused on like one chunk. And I'm like, no, there's still things you can be doing, even if you're financially stable or you grew up with a financially stable background. I hear the other side where people are talking about like, like their debt payoff journeys and like lessons they could have learned. So I think the one universal thing is that everyone has everyone feels as if they're the only one, or that their story is that like
Mhm.
no one can relate. And what I found in the podcast and in sharing these stories is that actually like there are many common themes. There are common themes across, scarcity mindset. There are common themes about feeling insecure. There are common themes around feeling we should be doing more, no matter where you come from in the economic spectrum. And so that was my hypothesis. I was like, I believe that if I start this show, then people will start realizing that money issues are universal. And I feel like I'm proving it through each episode.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's cool. And then I had maybe one last question to you. You're working in the finance space. Do you see any? How is the financial literacy level? Would you say not level, but how is the topic of financial literacy for the people themselves? Because okay, they might be I don't know, fund managers. They might deal with accounting. They might deal with various topics. But do you feel that their personal finances are in the right place, or do you still feel, hmm, well, they don't have their ducks in a row yet, neither, even though they're in the finance space?
I think that's a good question. I will say that I feel like the financial services industry, especially like in the world of, let's say like high finance, like investment banking and private equity, you tend to see disproportionately a lot of individuals who come from immense wealth, and a lot of privileged backgrounds. And you
Mhm.
can note that because they've had like financial advisors their whole life. You can just tell you're like, oh, your parents have always had an advisor. And like, so they've put money in a trust for, and you have, so I kind of feel like, in a way, if you're someone like me who grew up middle class and you make your way into those circles, you talk about it even less because you're like,
Mhm.
I'm not going to like, well, I'm not going to show my kind of social position. Like, I'm not going to talk about because I don't know what to say.
Mhm.
So it's an interesting world where you have, I think there's some people who tend to dominate the conversation because of the privilege that they come from. And because of that privilege that everyone's trying to aspire to, it's not discussed. So you really don't know what's going on
Mhm.
financially, in people's lives in that area. And the more I kind of interact with individuals through, social media, the more they can say, they'll share stories of, yeah, I was actually in that industry and I was broke, but I wasn't telling any of my friends this because I had
Mhm.
to maintain this image. So I think it's a tricky one because the salaries are very high, obviously, but
Yes, but
so
then you
too
you maybe you need
the
to You don't need to,
Image, yeah.
maybe you need to, to have this image, wear a
Yeah.
suit every day and this kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Show
Yeah,
success.
exactly. So I think the lifestyle creep can really, yeah, creep up on you.
Yeah.
But people I think always gave the perception, like the outward perception that everything was really under control. So I never had the feeling I was like, oh, that person's really broke.
Yeah. Okay. And then maybe one last question for the listeners. What would you say? Would you have 2, 3 financial tips to get started, to get your finances in order? What would you say?
The first thing I would say to anybody is just log into their accounts. Like, do you know how many times I forgot my password? It's embarrassing. I think I forget it every 5 months. And I think I'm like, oh, I'm going to log into my account, but I'm not going to because I forgot my password. So if you're listening today, please just like reset that password, like reset it and log into your account and check and like just lay out all your balances. If you use an Excel spreadsheet to do that, that's great. I recently started using Personal Capital because you can link your accounts and the visualizations are really nice. But that's step one, because if you don't know what you have, you can't make a plan. So the first thing is just like swallow your pride. You've forgotten all your passwords and your usernames. It's cool. Recover them. Take those 10 minutes. We've all been there. So that'll be like the first step that I would take. And the second one would be, I think the most important thing is to kind of map out your goals, right? And for each person, that can be different. For some people, it could be, I want to start building my emergency fund. For some people, it's, okay, I need to pay off this high interest debt. Other people, it's, I want to buy a house in 10 years. Some people, it's, I want to buy a car. I want to maybe go back to school. Each of those situations are going to engender very different financial choices, right? And very different habits. So after you've seen what you have, you need to identify, okay, what is my goal? So for example, when I was starting to apply to business schools, I knew that I would, have to forego income when I was a student. So I started to kind of spend more mindfully, eat out less, try to save more, because I was trying to build up a little nest egg for myself for when I did eventually go to school. Things like, so, my long-term plans will influence your short-term decisions. So yeah, I think those are the two things that I would say: log in and make a plan.
And very easy, and you can do it now, basically.
Exact right now. It's
I mean,
okay.
maybe not the
I
plan.
don't tell
The
anybody
plan
about
needs
your password.
Yeah, the plan needs some thinking and some time, but at least logging in and setting up your, visualizing what you have. It's excellent tip. I never heard it before, so very good. Thank you, Ilona. And then, Ilona, we've come at the end of the show, and as you may know, so first of all, thank you for sharing your story, your money memories with us, and as well for sharing these tips and this inspiring, giving us some inspiration to get better with our finances as well. And so as you know, we have before we close, we have our 3 quick fire questions. So are you ready?
As ready as I'll ever be.
I see you ready. So we talked about investing, but what has been your best investment so far?
My education. Yes, definitely my education. I was privileged to attend some of the best schools in the world. And I definitely can say, including high school, I think my high school, my free public high school is some of the best education I ever received. And so I think the best investment I ever made for myself is in my education, because it's afforded me opportunities and open doors that I don't think would otherwise be available to me.
Excellent. And do you have a book that you can recommend to anyone, a book that inspires you, or and it does not need to be a financial book?
The Count of Monte Cristo. I really want to live his life.
Okay, I didn't read it, but okay. I'll, I know, shocking.
You must.
I must.
Classic.
Okay, well, I'll look it up anyway, so I'll have a look. Very good. And last question, it's always a tricky one. What has been your best purchase for under $100?
Easily my microphone. I call him Sammy or Samuel. It's the Samsung Q2U. It's the microphone that I Googled when I was starting my podcast, and it's just been terrific. I think this microphone represents like so much to me. I'm looking at it, talking to it as a person. My microphone, I think it was like $70. Yeah.
Perfect. Excellent. It does not cost a lot to start a podcast, so you can start as well, or maybe use it for a YouTube channel if you're listening and want to start. So $70, that's it, and you have your phone. Okay, excellent. So Ilona, the listeners, they can find you, of course, on your podcast, the Money Memories podcast, but where else can they find you?
Yeah, so my website, www.bearinthebull.com, is kind of like the central resource. You can read all my
Mhm.
writings for Forbes. You can listen to the Money Memories episodes, and also my blog posts. You can connect with me on Instagram at bear.andthebull, or also at money_memories. You can also tweet me. I'm at bearandthebull1. Basically, I'm around.
Yeah,
Please
you're
connect with me. I
everywhere.
can't wait to hear your stories.
Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, well, Ilona, it was a pleasure. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.